The whispers started the moment Beatrice Walsh stepped into the general store, her feet leaving wet prints on the weathered floorboards from the holes in her shoes that let in every pudge of mud from Valentine's rain-soaked streets. It was September 1883, and the Nebraska town had seen an unusually wet autumn, turning the main thoroughfare into a river of muck that clung to everything it touched. Beatrice kept her eyes down, clutching her thin coat closer to her body, despite knowing it did nothing to ward off the chill that had settled into her bones weeks ago. She had $3.17 in her pocket, money she had earned scrubbing floors at the hotel, and she needed flour, coffee, and lard to last her through the next 2 weeks until she could collect her wages again. "Lord have mercy, would you look at that?" came a woman's voice from near the fabric bolts, loud enough that Beatrice knew it was meant to be heard. Some people have no pride at all, coming into town looking like something the cat dragged in. Beatrice's cheeks burned, but she continued toward the counter where Mr. Henderson stood weighing out sugar for another customer. She had learned long ago that responding to cruelty only made it worse. Better to pretend she heard nothing, to become invisible if she could manage it. "Those shoes," another voice chimed in, this one belonging to Mrs. Cartwright, the banker's wife. "I have seen beggars with better footwear, and that coat, why, it is practically transparent. How does she expect to make it through winter in that pitiful thing?" The other customer at the counter, a rancher's wife named Mrs. Sullivan, turned to look at Beatrice with undisguised disdain. "Some people should know their place, coming in here among decent folk when she looks like she has been sleeping in a ditch." Beatrice bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. She had not been sleeping in a ditch, though her circumstances were not much better. The tiny room she rented above the saddle shop was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was hers, and she paid for it with honest work. She had been in Valentine for 3 months now, having come west after her father died and left her with nothing but debts she could not pay. She had no family, no prospects, and no options except to work whatever job she could find in whatever town would have her. The general store fell silent except for the sound of rain pattering against the windows. Beatrice could feel every eye on her, judging her, finding her wanting. She wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Mr. Henderson," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to purchase some supplies, please." The storekeeper looked uncomfortable, glancing between Beatrice and his other customers. He was not a cruel man, but he was a businessman, and these women represented money and influence in Valentine. Beatrice represented neither. Before he could respond, the door behind her opened, letting in a gust of wind and rain. Heavy bootfalls crossed the threshold, and Beatrice stepped aside to make room, pressing herself against a shelf of canned goods. She did not look up to see who had entered, keeping her gaze fixed on a tin of peaches at eye level. "Afternoon, ladies," came a deep voice, rich and warm as honey. "Mr. Henderson." "Preston Parker," Mrs. Cartwright said, her tone immediately changing to something syrupy sweet. "What brings you into town on such a dreadful day?" "Needed some supplies for the ranch," the man replied. His voice was closer now, and Beatrice could see his boots from the corner of her eye, well-made leather that had been cared for properly, the kind of boots that cost more money than she made in 3 months. "But I could not help overhearing your conversation just now." The women tittered nervously, and Beatrice felt her stomach drop. Now even the local ranchers were going to join in mocking her. She should have waited, should have come to town on a different day, should have known better than to think she could conduct her business without incident. "We were just remarking on certain standards of appearance," Mrs. Sullivan said primly. "Were you now?" Preston said, and there was something in his voice that made Beatrice finally look up. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt and eyes the color of a summer storm. He was looking not at her, but at the three women who had been so quick to judge. "That is interesting, because I was just thinking about how courage and dignity cannot be measured by the quality of one's clothing." Mrs. Cartwright's smile faltered. "I am sure I do not know what you mean." "I mean," Preston continued, his voice still pleasant but with an edge of steel beneath it, "that it takes real bravery to keep your head high when the world has knocked you down. That kind of strength impresses me a whole lot more than fancy dresses and sharp tongues." He turned then, looking directly at Beatrice, and she found she could not look away from his gaze. "Miss, I apologize for the rudeness you have had to endure. You deserve better." Beatrice opened her mouth, but no words came out. She could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to her with such respect, let alone defended her against people of social standing. Preston turned back to Mr. Henderson. "I would like to help this young lady with her purchases today. Whatever she needs, put it on my account." "That is not necessary," Beatrice managed to say, finding her voice at last. "I have money to pay for my own supplies." "I am sure you do," Preston said, his expression softening as he looked at her again. "But I am asking you to let me do this. Call it a welcome to Valentine if you like. A gesture of goodwill." He paused, then added, "And after we get your supplies sorted, I would like to take you to the cobbler and the clothing store. Those shoes will not last another week in this weather, and you will need a proper coat before the real cold sets in." "I cannot accept such charity," Beatrice said, even as her heart hammered in her chest at the thought of new shoes, of a coat that actually kept out the wind. "I do not even know you." "Then let us remedy that," Preston said, and he held out his hand to her. "Preston Parker. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town. And you are Beatrice Walsh," she said quietly, looking at his extended hand as if it might bite her. Slowly she reached out and took it. His hand was warm, calloused from hard work, and his grip was firm but gentle. "Miss Walsh," he said, "it is a genuine pleasure to meet you. Now, what supplies did you need today?" Beatrice glanced past him at the three women, who were watching the exchange with expressions ranging from shock to indignation. She knew this would make her situation in town more complicated. They would spread gossip about her now, would make assumptions about her relationship with Preston Parker. But as she looked back at this man who had appeared like some kind of avenging angel in boots and a rain-dampened hat, she found she did not care what they thought anymore. "Flour, coffee, and lard," she said. "Please." "That is a start," Preston said. He turned to Mr. Henderson. "Add sugar, salt, dried beans, bacon, eggs, a tin of those peaches she was looking at, and anything else you think a person might need for a well-stocked pantry. Oh, and some of that good tea you keep behind the counter, the kind from England." "Mr. Parker, really, this is too much," Beatrice protested, but he held up a hand. "Miss Walsh, do you know what my father told me before he died and left me that ranch?" Preston asked. She shook her head. "He said that a man's wealth is not measured by what he keeps, but by what he gives away. He said that if you have the means to help someone and you choose not to, you are poorer than the person you refuse to help." He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more genuine. "I have the means to help you today. Will you let me be a rich man instead of a poor one?" Beatrice felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of these judgmental women, would not give them the satisfaction. But the kindness in Preston's eyes was almost too much to bear after so many weeks of scorn and loneliness. "You are very kind," she whispered. "I am practical," he corrected. cannot have a resident of Valentine walking around in shoes that let in water. You will catch your death of cold, and then Doc Harrison will be grumpy about having to treat you, and he will come complain to me because he knows I will listen, and the whole thing will be a mess." His tone was light, teasing, trying to make her smile. "So really, I am doing this for purely selfish reasons. Despite everything, despite the horrible afternoon and the cruel words and the weight of her poverty pressing down on her shoulders, Beatrice felt her lips twitch into a small smile. "When you put it that way, I suppose I have no choice but to accept." "Excellent," Preston said. He looked at Mr. Henderson. "Get those supplies together, please. We will be back to collect them shortly." He offered Beatrice his arm like she was a fine lady instead of a girl in torn shoes and a threadbare coat. "Shall we visit the cobbler first? I have a feeling those shoes need replacing more urgently than anything else." Beatrice hesitated only a moment before placing her hand on his arm. The fabric of his sleeve was rough wool, warm from his body heat. As they walked toward the door, she heard Mrs. Cartwright's scandalized whisper behind them. "Well, I never. The nerve of him, treating her like she is somebody." Preston paused at the door and looked back over his shoulder. "She is somebody, madam. We all are. You might do well to remember that." Then he opened the door and guided Beatrice out into the rain. The street was a mess of mud and standing water, and Beatrice tried to step carefully to avoid the worst of it, but with the holes in her shoes it hardly mattered. Preston noticed her difficulty immediately and steered her toward the wooden walkway that ran along the storefronts, keeping them somewhat protected from the elements by the overhanging roofs. "The cobbler is just down here," he said. "Old Martin makes the best boots in 3 counties. He will take good care of you." "Why are you doing this?" Beatrice asked as they walked. She had to know, had to understand what motivated this stranger to show her such extraordinary kindness. "You do not know anything about me. For all you know, those women were right to judge me. For all you know, I am a terrible person who deserves worn shoes and a thin coat." Preston was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "About 2 years ago, I was driving cattle through Wyoming in the middle of winter. We ran into a blizzard, the worst storm I have ever seen in my life. I got separated from my crew, lost in all that white. My horse threw a shoe and went lame, and I was on foot in conditions that should have killed me." He paused, helping her step over a particularly large puddle before continuing. "I wandered for hours, maybe longer. I lost track of time. I was certain I was going to die out there, freeze to death and not be found until spring. Then I stumbled on a homestead, just a tiny dugout house barely bigger than a shed. The people living there, they had even less than you do now. But they took me in, warmed me up, shared their food with me even though I could see they did not have much to spare. They saved my life." Beatrice listened, her earlier embarrassment fading as she heard the genuine emotion in his voice. "When I tried to pay them, to give them money for their help, the old man who lived there refused. He said that kindness is not something you pay for, it is something you pass on. He told me to help the next person who needed it, and the next one after that." Preston looked at her then, his gray eyes serious. "I made a promise to myself that day that I would never ignore someone in need if I had the ability to help them. So that is why I am doing this, Miss Walsh. Not because I think you are desperate or pitiable, but because someone once helped me when I needed it most, and now I have the chance to do the same for you." They had reached the cobbler's shop, a small building with a painted sign showing a boot hanging above the door. Beatrice stopped before they went inside, turning to face Preston fully. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and droplets of water clung to his dark hair and the shoulders of his coat. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Not just for the shoes and the coat, but for treating me like I matter. I have not felt like that in a very long time. Something flickered in Preston's eyes, an emotion she could not quite name. You do matter, he said firmly. Do not ever let anyone make you believe otherwise. The cobbler's shop was warm and smelled of leather and oil. An older man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from his workbench as they entered, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Preston. Preston Parker, as I live and breathe, the cobbler said in a voice roughened by years of tobacco. What brings you in on such a wet day? Afternoon, Martin, Preston said. My friend here needs a good pair of shoes, maybe 2 pairs actually, something sturdy that will last through winter. Martin's gaze shifted to Beatrice, taking in her soaked feet and ruined shoes. Unlike the women in the general store, there was no judgment in his eyes, only professional assessment. Well now, let us see what we have got to work with. Miss, if you would be so kind as to have a seat over here. Beatrice sat in the wooden chair Martin indicated, feeling self-conscious as he gently examined her feet. The shoes she wore were falling apart completely, the soles separating from the uppers, the leather cracked and stiff from being repeatedly soaked and dried. These are done for, I am afraid, Martin said, but his tone was kind. You have been walking on wet feet for a while now, have you not? That can lead to all sorts of problems if it is not addressed. I know, Beatrice said quietly. I just have not had the means to replace them. Well, we are going to fix that right now, Martin said. He stood and moved to one of the many shelves that lined his shop, examining various boxes and pairs of shoes. I've got some good sturdy work shoes here that I think will fit you. And I can make you a pair of Sunday shoes as well, something a bit nicer for when you want to dress up. The work shoes will be sufficient, Beatrice said quickly, conscious of how much this must already be costing Preston. I do not need anything fancy. Nonsense, Preston said from where he stood near the door. Get both pairs, Martin, and make sure they fit properly. I do not want her developing blisters. Martin worked efficiently, measuring her feet and trying different sizes until he found shoes that fit well. The work shoes were sturdy brown leather, practical and well made. The Sunday shoes were black with a small heel, more elegant than anything Beatrice had owned in years. She tried them both on, walking around the shop to test the fit, and she could have cried at how good it felt to have solid shoes on her feet, shoes without holes that kept out the wet. They are perfect, she told Martin, her voice thick with emotion. Good, good, Martin said, pleased. He wrapped her old shoes in brown paper despite their condition. I will put these in the package in case you want to keep them for any reason, though honestly, miss, you should probably just throw them away. I will, Beatrice said. She looked down at her feet, at the beautiful new shoes that fit so well. Thank you. Preston paid Martin, waving away his protests about the cost, and then they were back outside. The rain had stopped completely now, though the sky remained overcast and gray. Beatrice walked carefully, marveling at the difference the new shoes made. She was not stepping in puddles, not feeling the cold seep into her bones with every footfall. Now for that coat, Preston said. The general store has a clothing section, but if you would prefer, we could go to Mrs. Henderson's dress shop. She does good work with women's clothing. The general store is fine, Beatrice said quickly. She did not want to face those judgmental women again so soon, did not want to test her fragile composure any more than necessary. They walked back to the general store, where Mr. Henderson had their supplies stacked on the counter, neatly packaged and ready to go. The women who had mocked Beatrice earlier were gone, thankfully, and the store was quiet except for the ticking of a large clock on the wall. Let us find you that coat before we settle up, Preston said, guiding her to the back of the store where racks of clothing hung from wooden pegs. There were coats of various styles and sizes, some heavy wool for winter, others lighter canvas for spring and fall. Preston pulled down a thick wool coat in a deep blue color, well made with sturdy buttons and a high collar. "Try this one," he suggested, holding it out to her. Beatrice slipped off her thin coat, acutely aware of how it looked next to the beautiful new one. The wool coat was heavy and warm, settling onto her shoulders like a blanket. It fit well, the sleeves exactly the right length, the body cut to allow for movement while still being fitted enough to keep out drafts. "How does it feel?" Preston asked. "Like heaven," Beatrice said honestly. She touched the soft wool, running her fingers over the buttons. "It is beautiful. It suits you," Preston said. "The color brings out your eyes." He said it matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather, but Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks anyway. She had brown eyes, nothing special, nothing worth noting, but the way he said it made her feel like maybe they were worth noticing after all. "We will take this one too," Preston told Mr. Henderson, who nodded and added it to the growing tally. When everything was tallied up, the total came to more than Beatrice made in 2 months. She watched as Preston paid without hesitation, without any sign that the amount bothered him. He was clearly a man of means, but more than that, he was a man of character. She had known him for less than an hour, but she could already see that his kindness was genuine, not some show put on to impress others or make himself feel superior. "Let me help you carry all this," Preston said, gathering up several of the packages. "Where are you staying?" "Above the saddle shop," Beatrice said, picking up the lighter packages. "I rent a room there." "I know the place," Preston said. "Let us get you home then. You have had quite an afternoon." They walked through Valentine's muddy streets, the packages distributed between them. Beatrice was conscious of people watching them as they passed, could almost hear the wheels turning as folks tried to figure out what was happening between the wealthy rancher and the poor girl in her new shoes and new coat. She knew what they would assume, what stories they would tell. But she found she did not care as much as she thought she would. Let them talk. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe things could get better. The saddle shop was on a side street, a sturdy building that smelled of leather and saddle soap. The entrance to the upstairs room was around the back, accessed by an external staircase that creaked under their weight. Beatrice unlocked her door and pushed it open, immediately feeling embarrassed at the state of her small room. It was clean, she kept it meticulously so, but it was sparse and bare. Just the narrow bed, the washstand, a small table with one chair, and a few hooks on the wall for her limited clothing. "You can just set those on the table," she said, placing her own packages down. "Thank you for helping me carry everything." Preston set down his packages and looked around the room. She waited for him to make some comment about how small it was, how pitiful, but he did not. "This is a good-size room," he said instead. "You keep it nice. That is important." "It is all I can afford right now," Beatrice said, "but I am working on saving money. Eventually, I hope to have enough to rent a small house, maybe start some kind of business of my own." "What kind of business?" Preston asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Beatrice hesitated. She had never told anyone her dreams before, had learned that dreams were dangerous things to share because people had a way of crushing them. But something about Preston made her want to trust him. "I can sew," she said quietly. "I am good at it. Before my father died, I worked as a seamstress in St. Louis. I made dresses for wealthy women, did alterations, that sort of thing. I thought maybe someday I could do that here, open a proper dress shop. But I would need money for fabric and equipment, a real storefront." She shook her head. "It is probably foolish." "It is not foolish at all," Preston said firmly. "Valentine could use a good seamstress. Mrs. Henderson does her best, but she is getting older and her eyesight is not what it used to be. If you have real skill, I bet you could build up a steady clientele." "Maybe," Beatrice said, but she could not quite make herself believe it. The dream felt too big, too impossible. Preston seemed to sense her doubt. He pulled out the chair from her small table and sat down, looking up at her expectantly. "May I tell you something, Miss Walsh?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of her new coat. "When my father died, he left me a ranch that was barely scraping by," Preston said. "The cattle were scraggly, the land was overgrazed, and we were in debt up to our eyeballs. Everyone told me I should sell it, cut my losses, and move back east where I came from. But I looked at that land and I saw potential. I saw what it could be if someone was willing to work hard enough." He leaned back in the chair, his expression thoughtful. "It took me 3 years of breaking my back, of doing without, of making hard choices and harder sacrifices. But now the Parker Ranch is one of the most successful operations in this part of Nebraska. We have got good cattle, good land, and I employ 12 men year-round. I built that from nothing because I believed it was possible." He looked at her intently. "You have got that same potential, Miss Walsh. I can see it in you. You have got the determination and the skill. All you need is the opportunity." Beatrice felt something unfurling in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "You really think I could do it?" "I know you could," Preston said. He stood up, moving toward the door. "I should let you get settled with all your new supplies. But Miss Walsh, I want you to think about something. The Parker Ranch always needs mending done. Shirts that need buttons replaced, tears in work clothes that need patching, that sort of thing. I usually send it all into town to Mrs. Henderson, but if you would be willing to take on the work, I would be happy to pay you for it. It would not be much, but it might help you build up your savings toward that dress shop." "You have already done so much for me today," Beatrice said. "I cannot ask you to do more." "You are not asking," Preston pointed out. "I am offering. There is a difference." He tipped his hat to her. "Think about it, Miss Walsh. If you are interested, come out to the ranch sometime this week. Anyone in town can give you directions. Ask for me, and I will set you up with whatever mending needs doing." He was at the door now, one hand on the frame. Beatrice felt a sudden panic at the thought of him leaving, this man who had changed everything in the space of a few hours. She wanted to say something profound, something that would convey the depth of her gratitude, but words failed her. "Preston," she said, using his first name for the first time. He turned back to look at her and she took a deep breath. "Thank you for everything. For defending me, for the shoes and the coat, for the food, for giving me hope. I will never forget what you did for me today." His expression softened, and he smiled that genuine smile that made him look younger. "You are very welcome, Beatrice. I have a feeling we are going to be good friends." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden stairs as he descended. Beatrice closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She looked around her small room, at the packages of food on her table, at her new shoes on her feet and her new coat on her shoulders. She felt like Cinderella in one of the fairy tales her mother used to read to her, transformed by magic. Except this was not magic, this was kindness. This was one person seeing another person's need and choosing to help. She unpacked the supplies Preston had bought her, arranging them on the small shelf that served as her pantry. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, beans, bacon, eggs, lard, and the tin of peaches. There was also the good English tea he had mentioned, packaged in a pretty tin with flowers painted on it. She held it for a moment, running her fingers over the smooth surface, and felt tears finally spill down her cheeks. She had been so alone for so long, scraping by on the bare minimum, ignored or scorned by nearly everyone in Valentine. And then Preston Parker had walked into the general store and changed everything. He had seen her, really seen her, not as a poor girl to be pitied or mocked, but as a person worthy of respect and kindness. Beatrice wiped her tears away and took off her new coat, hanging it carefully on one of the hooks on the wall. She would go to the Parker ranch later this week, she decided. She would take Preston up on his offer of mending work. Not because she needed him to rescue her, though his help was certainly welcome, but because she wanted to see him again. Because in the brief time they had spent together, she had felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She had felt like she mattered. The next few days passed in a strange sort of limbo. Beatrice continued her work at the hotel, scrubbing floors and changing linens and emptying chamber pots. It was hard, thankless work, but she did it without complaint because it paid for her room and kept food on her table. The other women who worked at the hotel largely ignored her, and the guests treated her as if she were furniture. But Beatrice was used to that by now. What she was not used to was the way people in town started looking at her differently. Word had spread about Preston Parker buying her shoes and a coat, about him escorting her through town like she was somebody important. The gossip was rampant. Some people assumed she was Preston's mistress, though they whispered it rather than saying it outright. Others thought she had somehow tricked or manipulated him into helping her. A few, a very few, seemed to think that maybe Preston was just a decent man doing a kind thing. Mrs. Cartwright went out of her way to cut Beatrice in the street one afternoon, turning her back when Beatrice walked past. But Beatrice held her head high, wrapped in her warm blue coat, her feet dry in her sturdy new shoes, and she did not let it bother her. Let them think what they wanted. She knew the truth. On Thursday morning, Beatrice woke before dawn and made herself presentable. She put on her best dress, which was still worn but at least clean and mended, and she braided her dark hair carefully, pinning it up in a neat style. She packed a small bag with her sewing supplies, needles and thread and scissors and a thimble, and set out for the Parker Ranch. The walk was 5 miles, but the weather had cleared and the roads were drying out. In her new shoes, the distance was manageable. She passed farms and homesteads, fields where the last of the harvest was being brought in. The landscape was beautiful in the early morning light, all golden and green with touches of autumn red beginning to show in the trees. The Parker Ranch was impossible to miss. The property was marked by a large wooden gate with a carved sign reading Parker Cattle Company hanging above it. Beyond the gate, a well-maintained road led to a sprawling ranch house and several large barns. Cattle grazed in the fields on either side, fat and healthy-looking animals that spoke to good management. Beatrice walked up the road, her heart beating faster with each step. She hoped Preston had meant his offer, that she would not arrive and find out it had been empty politeness. She hoped even more that seeing him again would feel the same as it had in town, that she had not imagined the connection between them. As she approached the main house, she saw men working in the corrals and around the barns. A few of them looked up as she passed, tipping their hats politely but not stopping their work. The ranch house itself was impressive, a 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapped around the front. It was painted white with dark green shutters, well-maintained and welcoming. Beatrice climbed the porch steps and knocked on the front door, her nervousness increasing with each passing second. She heard footsteps inside, and then the door swung open to reveal Preston. He was dressed for work in sturdy trousers and a blue work shirt, his hair slightly rumpled as if he had been running his hands through it. When he saw her, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Beatrice," he said, using her first name as naturally as if they had known each other for years. "I was hoping you would come." "You said this week," Beatrice replied, suddenly worried that she had come too soon. "I hope I am not too early." "Not at all," Preston assured her, "Come in, please. Have you had breakfast? I was just sitting down to eat." "I ate before I left," Beatrice lied, not wanting to impose further on his generosity. Her stomach, however, betrayed her with an audible growl. Preston raised an eyebrow. That sounded like the cry of a starving bear. "Come on, you are joining me for breakfast. I will not take no for an answer." He led her through a comfortable front parlor and into a large kitchen at the back of the house. The room was warm from the cook stove and smelled heavenly of coffee and frying bacon. An older woman stood at the stove, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked up as they entered, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Beatrice Walsh," Preston said. "She is going to be doing some mending work for the ranch. Beatrice, this is Mrs. Chen. She keeps the house running and makes sure we all do not starve." "Pleased to meet you," Mrs. Chen said in slightly accented English. "Sit, sit. I make extra eggs and biscuits." "That is very kind of you," Beatrice said, taking the seat Preston indicated at the large wooden table. The kitchen was unlike anything she had seen before, spacious and well equipped with modern conveniences. Copper pots hung from hooks on the wall, and a large pantry door stood open, revealing shelves stocked with food. Preston poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "So you decided to take me up on my offer. If it still stands," Beatrice said carefully. "If you have mending that needs doing, I would be happy to help." "I have got plenty," Preston assured her. "The men are hard on their clothes, always tearing things or losing buttons, and I am no better. I have got a pile of shirts in my room that need attention." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "I am going to be honest with you, Beatrice. I did need someone to help with the mending, that part was not made up, but I also offered because I wanted to see you again. I wanted to make sure you were doing all right after what happened in town." Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "I am doing better than I have in a long time, thanks to you, Mrs. Chen brought over plates heaping with scrambled eggs, bacon, and fluffy biscuits. "You eat," she ordered Beatrice kindly. "Too skinny. Need more food." Beatrice did not argue. The food was delicious, better than anything she could have made in her small room. She ate slowly, savoring every bite while Preston told her about the ranch and how it operated. He spoke with obvious pride about the cattle, about the improvements he had made to the property, about the men who worked for him. "I try to treat my employees fairly," he said. "Pay them well, give them decent living conditions. Some of them have families, so I built cottages for them on the property. The single men stay in the bunkhouse. Everyone gets 3 meals a day and Sundays off except for essential work like feeding the animals." "That is generous," Beatrice said. "Most ranchers do not treat their workers so well." "Most ranchers are fools," Preston said bluntly. "Happy workers are productive workers. If you treat people like they are disposable, they will not have any loyalty to you. But if you treat them with respect and pay them fairly, they will work their hearts out for you." He leaned back in his chair. "It is just good business, aside from being the right thing to do." After breakfast, Preston showed Beatrice around the ranch. She met some of the ranch hands, men with sun-weathered faces and strong handshakes who treated her with casual friendliness. She saw the cattle up close, massive animals that Preston clearly cared about deeply. He told her about breeding lines and grazing rotations and water management. And even though Beatrice knew nothing about ranching, she found herself fascinated by his obvious passion for his work. Finally, they returned to the house, and Preston led her to a small room off the kitchen that served as an office. Inside were shelves full of ledgers and papers, a large desk covered with documents, and a comfortable-looking chair. But what caught Beatrice's attention was the large basket sitting on the floor, overflowing with shirts and trousers and work clothes that needed repair. "Here is the mending," Preston said, looking almost embarrassed. "I told you it was a lot." Beatrice knelt down and examined the contents of the basket. Torn seams, missing buttons, holes that needed patching. It was several weeks' worth of work easily. "This will take me some time," she said. "Take all the time you need," Preston said. "I will pay you 50 cents per item, and I will provide all the thread and buttons and patches you need." "Does that sound fair?" Beatrice did some quick mental math. There had to be at least 40 items in that basket. At 50 cents each, that would be $20. A fortune. "That is more than fair," she managed to say. "That is extremely generous." "It is the going rate," Preston said, which Beatrice suspected was not entirely true. "You can work here if you like, or take items back to your room to work on them there, whatever you prefer." "I think I would like to work here if that is all right," Beatrice said. The thought of spending time in this comfortable house, perhaps seeing Preston regularly, was appealing. "It would be easier to ask about specific items if I have questions." "Then it is settled," Preston said, smiling. "You can use this office whenever you like. Make yourself at home." He hesitated, then added, "And Beatrice, you are welcome to come here for meals if you would like. Mrs. Chen always makes more than enough, and it seems foolish for you to walk all the way out here without at least getting a good lunch." "You do not have to keep feeding me," Beatrice protested, though the offer was tempting. "You have already done so much." "I want to," Preston said simply. "Besides, it will give us a chance to talk. I find myself wanting to know more about you. Where you came from, what brought you to Valentine, what your dreams are for the future." Beatrice looked at him, at this kind, generous man who seemed genuinely interested in her as a person. She had been so alone for so long, and the thought of having someone to talk to, someone who actually cared about her answers, was almost overwhelming. "I would like that," she said quietly. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, Beatrice fell into a new routine. She would wake early, work her morning shift at the hotel, and then walk out to the Parker ranch to spend the afternoon doing mending. Preston set her up in the office with everything she needed, and she worked steadily through the basket of clothes, repairing and mending with the skill that came from years of practice. But more than the work, Beatrice treasured the time she spent talking with Preston. He would stop by the office during his workday, ostensibly to check on her progress, but really just to talk. They spoke about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Boston, about how his father had moved west to start the ranch when Preston was 16, about how he had learned ranching from the ground up. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her father who had been a clerk until his drinking got him fired, about the struggle to survive after he died and left her with nothing but debt. Preston listened to her stories without judgment, without pity, just genuine interest and compassion. He asked questions that showed he was really listening, that he cared about the details of her life. And slowly, gradually, Beatrice found herself opening up in ways she never had before. They also laughed together, sharing stories and jokes and observations about life in Valentine. Preston had a dry sense of humor that caught Beatrice off guard sometimes, making her laugh so hard she had to put down her sewing. He seemed to delight in making her laugh, as if her happiness brought him joy. Mrs. Chen fed Beatrice lunch every day, hearty meals that gradually put healthy weight back on her too thin frame. The older woman seemed to have adopted Beatrice as a project, always pushing second helpings on her and clucking about how she needed to eat more. Beatrice grew fond of Mrs. Chen, appreciating her no-nonsense kindness. The ranch hands also grew accustomed to her presence. They would greet her cheerfully when she arrived, sometimes bringing her items that needed mending beyond what was in Preston's basket. She mended torn shirts and patched trousers and replaced buttons, and the men paid her gratefully, adding to her growing savings. But it was Preston who occupied most of her thoughts. She found herself looking forward to seeing him each day, found herself thinking about him at odd moments. The way he pushed his hair back from his forehead when he was thinking, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, warm and genuine, the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something precious and valuable. She tried not to read too much into it. Preston was kind to everyone, she reminded herself. He helped people because that was who he was, not because he had any special feelings for her. But sometimes, when their eyes met across the office and held just a moment too long, or when his hand brushed hers as he handed her something and he did not pull away immediately, she wondered if maybe, possibly, he felt something more. One afternoon in late October, Beatrice was working on what had to be the 100th shirt when Preston came into the office carrying 2 cups of coffee. It had become their routine, this mid-afternoon break where they would sit and talk for a while before she went back to work. "I have been thinking," Preston said as he handed her a cup and settled into the chair across from her. "The town dance is coming up next week. It is an annual thing, happens every fall after the harvest is in. Everyone goes." "That sounds nice," Beatrice said carefully, wondering where he was going with this. "I was wondering if you would consider going with me," Preston said, and there was something uncertain in his voice, a vulnerability she had not heard before. "As my guest." Beatrice's heart seemed to stop and then start again at double speed. "You want to take me to the town dance?" "I do," Preston said. "Very much. But I understand if you would rather not. I know what people in town have been saying about us, the gossip and speculation. If you do not want to give them more fuel for their rumors, I would understand that." Beatrice set down her sewing and looked at him directly. "What are they saying?" Preston sighed. "That you are my mistress, that I am keeping you, that you somehow trapped me or manipulated me." He looked angry on her behalf. "All sorts of ugly nonsense that is not true and not fair to you. And you want to take me to a public dance knowing that people are saying those things?" Beatrice asked. "Won't that make it worse for you? People will talk." "Let them talk," Preston said firmly. "I do not care what they say about me. I care about you, Beatrice. I care about spending time with you. These past few weeks, working with you, talking to you, getting to know you have been some of the best weeks I have had in years. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be better." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I like you. A great deal. And I want to take you to the dance, not because I feel sorry for you or because I am trying to rescue you, but because I want to spend the evening with you. I want to dance with you and talk to you and show the whole town that I am proud to be seen with you." Beatrice felt tears prickling at her eyes again, but these were happy tears. "I like you too," she admitted. "So much that it scares me sometimes. I have never felt this way about anyone before." Preston's expression softened into something tender. "Then you will come with me to the dance?" "Yes," Beatrice said, smiling through her tears. "I would be honored to go with you." Preston stood up and crossed the small distance between them, taking her hands in his and pulling her gently to her feet. They stood close together, so close that Beatrice could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the individual shades of gray in his eyes. "I have wanted to do this for weeks," Preston said softly, and then he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and careful, as if he was afraid she might break. Beatrice's eyes fluttered closed and she kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. She had been kissed before, fumbling encounters with boys in St. Louis that had meant nothing. But this was different. This kiss felt like a promise, like the beginning of something important. When they pulled apart, Preston was smiling down at her with such obvious affection that it made her heart ache. "I have been wanting to do that for a very long time," he said. "I am glad you finally did," Beatrice replied, feeling brave and happy and more hopeful than she had in years. The next week passed in a blur of excitement and nervousness. Beatrice finished the last of the mending in Preston's basket, earning herself $22 that she tucked carefully away in her savings. Combined with what she had saved from her hotel work and the additional mending she had done for the ranch hands, she now had almost $40 put aside. It was more money than she had ever had at one time, and it made her dream of opening a dress shop feel just a little bit more possible. But more than the money, Beatrice treasured the time she spent with Preston. They took walks around the ranch property, him pointing out his plans for future improvements, her asking questions and offering observations. They sat on the porch in the late afternoon sun, talking about books they had read and places they wanted to see. They shared meals with easy conversation and comfortable silences. Preston kissed her again during one of those walks, and then again on the porch, and each time it felt more natural, more right. He was always careful with her, always respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But Beatrice could feel the restrained passion in his kisses, could sense that he wanted more even as he held himself back. The night of the dance arrived cool and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Preston picked Beatrice up from her room in a wagon he had borrowed from one of his ranch hands, the kind with a padded bench seat meant for courting couples. He helped her up into the wagon with a hand on her waist, and Beatrice felt the touch all the way through her dress. She had spent what little spare money she had on fabric to make herself a new dress for the occasion. It was simple. She did not have enough money for anything elaborate, but she had chosen a pretty rose-colored cotton that brought out the pink in her cheeks. She had styled her hair carefully, pinning it up with some pins she had borrowed from Mrs. Chen, and she wore her good black shoes that Martin the cobbler had made for her. "You look beautiful," Preston said when he saw her, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "Thank you," she said. "You look very handsome yourself." He did. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt under a vest with a string tie at his throat. His hair was neatly combed and he smelled faintly of soap and something woodsy. He looked like what he was, a successful rancher with both means and good looks. Beatrice felt a flutter of nerves at the thought of walking into the dance on his arm, of facing the judgment and gossip that was sure to follow. As if sensing her nervousness, Preston took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We do not have to go if you do not want to," he said quietly. "We could do something else instead. Have a quiet dinner, take a drive, whatever you would prefer." "No," Beatrice said, squaring her shoulders. "I want to go. I am tired of hiding, tired of being ashamed of who I am and where I came from. If people want to talk, let them talk. I will be walking in there with the finest man in Valentine, and that is all that matters." Preston smiled at her, his eyes warm with affection and something that looked like pride. "That is my girl," he said softly. The dance was being held in the largest barn in Valentine, which had been cleared out and decorated for the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. A group of musicians sat on a small platform at one end, playing lively music on fiddles and guitars, and a battered piano someone had hauled in for the event. The barn was already full of people, families and couples and groups of young people laughing and talking. Beatrice felt every eye turn to them as they entered, felt the wave of whispers and speculation that followed in their wake. Mrs. Cartwright and Mrs. Sullivan were standing near the refreshment table, their eyes wide with shock and disapproval. Several ranch hands who knew Preston tipped their hats respectfully, but their wives looked at Beatrice with undisguised curiosity and judgment. Preston seemed oblivious to it all. He kept Beatrice's hand firmly tucked into the crook of his arm as he led her into the barn, stopping to greet people he knew, introducing Beatrice as if she were someone important. Some people were polite, responding with neutral courtesy. Others were openly rude, turning away or giving terse responses, but Preston did not let any of it faze him. He got them both cups of punch and found them a place to stand where they could watch the dancing. "Having fun yet?" he asked with a wry smile. "About as much fun as a root canal," Beatrice replied, making him laugh. "Just wait," he said. "Once the dancing starts and people have had a few cups of punch that may or may not have been spiked by the Johnson boys, everyone will relax and forget to judge us so harshly." He was right. As the evening progressed and the music got livelier, people became less focused on Preston and Beatrice and more focused on having a good time. Preston led Beatrice onto the dance floor for a waltz, and despite her nervousness, she found that he was a good dancer, leading her through the steps with easy confidence. They danced several dances, and with each one, Beatrice felt herself relaxing more, enjoying herself more. During a break in the music, a young woman approached them. She was pretty with blonde hair and a sweet face, wearing a blue dress that looked homemade but well crafted. "Preston Parker," she said with a smile. "I have not seen you at one of these dances in ages." "Emily," Preston said warmly. "Good to see you. Beatrice, this is Emily Reynolds. Her father owns the farm adjacent to my southern boundary. Emily, this is Beatrice Walsh." "Pleased to meet you," Emily said, and unlike so many others, she seemed genuine. "I have heard about you. You are the seamstress, right?" "I heard you do beautiful work." "I try," Beatrice said, surprised and pleased by the friendly greeting. "I mostly do mending right now, but I used to make dresses before I came to Valentine." "Really?" Emily's eyes lit up. "I am getting married next spring, and I have been trying to figure out how to make my wedding dress. Mrs. Henderson offered to help, but her style is so old-fashioned. Would you be willing to help me? I could pay you, of course." "I would love to," Beatrice said, feeling a flutter of excitement. A wedding dress. It had been years since she had made something so special. "We could meet and discuss what you have in mind." "That would be wonderful," Emily said. She glanced at Preston and then back at Beatrice, and there was something knowing in her smile. "I am glad Preston brought you tonight. Do not let the old biddies get to you. Half of them are just jealous because their own husbands never showed them half the kindness Preston shows to everyone." She squeezed Beatrice's hand briefly. "You make a lovely couple." After Emily left, Beatrice looked up at Preston. "She was nice." "She is one of the good ones," Preston agreed. "There are more like her in Valentine than there are like Mrs. Cartwright, even if the loud ones get more attention." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Mrs. Cartwright appeared at Preston's elbow. She was dressed in an elaborate purple gown that was far too fancy for a barn dance, and she wore a superior expression that Beatrice was coming to recognize as her default setting. "Preston," Mrs. Cartwright said, ignoring Beatrice entirely. "I was just telling Mrs. Sullivan what a shame it is to see a young man of your standing and prospects wasting his time on unsuitable companions. Surely you must realize how this looks to the community." Preston's expression went cold, all the warmth draining from his eyes. "And I was just thinking what a shame it is to see grown women who should know better behaving with such appalling rudeness. Miss Walsh is my guest, Mrs. Cartwright, and I will thank you to treat her with the respect she deserves." Mrs. Cartwright's face flushed red. "Well, I never. I am simply concerned for your reputation." "My reputation is my own concern, not yours," Preston said firmly. and I am quite content with the company I keep. Now, if you will excuse us, I believe the next dance is starting." He turned to Beatrice and offered her his hand with exaggerated formality. "Miss Walsh, would you do me the honor?" Beatrice took his hand, fighting the urge to giggle at Mrs. Cartwright's outraged expression. As Preston led her back onto the dance floor, she could not help but ask, "Do you think that was wise? She is an influential woman in town." "She is a busybody with too much time on her hands and not enough kindness in her heart," Preston replied. "I am not going to let people like her dictate who I spend time with or how I live my life." He pulled Beatrice closer as the music started, a slow waltz this time. "Besides, I meant what I said earlier. I am proud to be with you. I do not care what anyone else thinks." They danced until late into the evening, taking breaks to talk with friendly people and ignore the unfriendly ones. Beatrice met several other young women who expressed interest in her sewing skills, and by the end of the night, she had commitments for 3 dress commissions. It was more work than she had expected, and it gave her hope that maybe, just maybe, her dream of a dress shop was not so impossible after all. As Preston drove her home in the wagon, Beatrice leaned against his shoulder, tired but happy. The night was cold but clear, and she was warm in her blue wool coat. Preston had one arm around her shoulders, holding her close as they rode through the dark countryside. "Thank you for tonight," Beatrice said softly. "For taking me, for defending me, for everything. I had a wonderful time." "So did I," Preston said. He turned to look at her, his face partially shadowed in the darkness. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something. These past few weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has made me realize something important." "What is that?" Beatrice asked, her heart beginning to beat faster. "I am falling in love with you," Preston said simply. "Maybe I have been falling since that first day in the general store. You are smart and talented and strong in ways that I admire so much. You have faced hardship that would have broken most people, but you kept going, kept fighting, kept believing in better days. You inspire me, Beatrice. You make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you." Beatrice felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling that first day when you stood up for me. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever treated me like I mattered." Preston stopped the wagon and turned to face her fully. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You matter, Beatrice Walsh. You matter to me more than anyone else in the world, and I promise you, as long as I am breathing, I will make sure you never forget that." Then he kissed her, and this kiss was different from the ones before. This kiss was deep and passionate, full of promise and desire and love. Beatrice kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her feelings into it, all her hope and joy and gratitude. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "I should get you home," Preston said reluctantly. "It is late, and you have work in the morning." "I know," Beatrice said, but she made no move to pull away from him. She felt safe here in his arms, safer than she had felt anywhere in years. She did not want this night to end, but eventually they reached the saddle shop, and Preston helped her down from the wagon. He walked her up the stairs to her door, his hand warm in hers. At the door, he kissed her again, sweetly this time, almost reverently. "I will see you tomorrow," he said. "I have more mending that needs doing." Beatrice smiled, knowing that the mending was just an excuse to see her. "I will be there." She watched from her doorway as he descended the stairs and drove away, his wagon disappearing into the darkness. Then she went inside her small room, lit her lamp, and sat on her bed, hugging herself with happiness. She was in love. She was actually, truly in love, and he loved her back. It felt like a miracle. Over the following months, Beatrice's life changed in ways she had never dared to imagine. Her sewing commissions increased as word spread about her skill and reasonable prices. She made Emily's wedding dress, a beautiful creation of white satin and lace that made the bride cry happy tears when she tried it on. She made everyday dresses for ranch wives and town women, church dresses for special occasions, even some shirts and trousers for men who wanted something more fitted than the ready-made options available at the general store. The money she earned went into her savings, which grew steadily week by week. By December, she had enough to start seriously thinking about renting a proper storefront for her dress shop. Preston helped her look at available properties in Valentine, offering advice and support, but never trying to take over or make decisions for her. He respected her independence, her need to build this dream with her own hands. Their relationship deepened as well. They spent as much time together as their work allowed. Preston took her on picnics when the weather permitted, taught her to ride horses, showed her the parts of his ranch he was most proud of. Beatrice cooked meals for him in his kitchen, learning recipes from Mrs. Chen, enjoying the domestic comfort of preparing food for someone she loved. They also spent long evenings talking about their future, about the life they wanted to build together. Preston made it clear that he wanted to marry Beatrice, that he saw her as his future wife, but he was patient, willing to wait until she felt ready. Beatrice appreciated his patience, even as she found herself increasingly certain that she wanted to spend the rest of her life with this man. In January of 1884, Beatrice signed a lease on a small storefront on Valentine's Main Street. It had large windows for displaying dresses, a back room where she could do her sewing, and enough space for fitting rooms and storage. Preston helped her move in, along with several of his ranch hands who seemed genuinely happy to see her taking this step. Emily and a few other women who had become Beatrice's friends also came to help, bringing house-warming gifts and good wishes. The grand opening of Walsh Dress Shop happened on a Saturday in late January. Beatrice was terrified that no one would come, that her dream would fail before it even truly began. But Preston had faith in her, and his faith proved justified. The shop was busy from the moment she opened the doors, with women coming to look at her samples, to commission new dresses, to order alterations. Even some of the women who had been judgmental toward her in the past came, drawn by curiosity and by the reality that Beatrice made beautiful clothes at fair prices. By the end of that first day, Beatrice had more orders than she could fill in a month. She was exhausted but exhilarated, her dream finally becoming reality. Preston came by as she was closing up, bringing her dinner and a bottle of wine to celebrate. "I am so proud of you," he said, pulling her into his arms for a kiss. "You did this, Beatrice. You made this happen through your own hard work and talent." "I could not have done it without you," Beatrice said, resting her head against his chest. "You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You gave me the opportunity to build my savings. You supported me every step of the way." "I helped a little," Preston conceded. "But this is your achievement, your dream, and watching you make it come true has been one of the greatest privileges of my life." They ate dinner sitting on the floor of Beatrice's new shop, surrounded by bolts of fabric and sewing supplies, talking about the future. And as they talked, Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Beatrice Walsh," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I have been carrying this ring around for 2 months now, waiting for the right moment, and I realize today that there is no more right moment than this. You have achieved your dream. You have built something beautiful from nothing, and I want to spend the rest of my life watching you achieve more dreams, building more beautiful things, becoming more and more the amazing woman I fell in love with. He took her hand, his eyes serious and full of love. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner in all things, supporting you and loving you for as long as we both shall live?" Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face again, but she did not bother to wipe them away. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, and it was a kiss full of promise and passion and forever. They were married in April, in a small ceremony at the church in Valentine, with Emily and her new husband as witnesses and Mrs. Chen, and several of Preston's ranch hands in attendance. Beatrice wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Preston wore his best suit, and he looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Preston kissed her in front of everyone, holding her close and whispering, "I love you," against her lips. Then they walked out of the church together, hand in hand, ready to begin their life as a married couple. Beatrice moved into the ranch house, bringing her few possessions and setting up a sewing room in one of the spare bedrooms so she could continue working on dress commissions from home. She kept the shop in town as well, hiring a young woman named Sarah to help with the increasing workload. The shop thrived, becoming known throughout the region for quality work and reasonable prices. But more than the success of her business, Beatrice treasured the life she built with Preston. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other's dreams and goals, working together to make the ranch and the business both successful. They laughed together, argued occasionally but always made up, and loved each other with a depth and intensity that only grew stronger with time. In December of 1884, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Preston, worried about how this would affect her ability to work, worried about being a good mother. But Preston was overjoyed, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite her protests that he would make her dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Our baby, Beatrice, a little person who is part of both of us." Their son was born in July of 1885, a healthy baby boy with dark hair like his mother and gray eyes like his father. They named him Peter, and Preston took to fatherhood like he had been born for it. He was patient and gentle with the baby, changing diapers and walking the floor at night when Peter cried, reading to him even though the baby was too young to understand the words. Beatrice managed to balance motherhood and her business, with Sarah taking on more responsibilities at the shop, and Beatrice focusing on design and fitting work that she could do from home. Mrs. Chen helped with Peter when Beatrice was working, and the baby thrived, growing chubby and happy under so much love and attention. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Belle, a tiny thing with blonde curls and her father's smile. And 3 years after that, another son they called Benjamin, rounding out their family at 3 children who filled the ranch house with noise and laughter and chaos. The years passed, bringing changes and challenges, but always more joy than sorrow. The ranch continued to prosper under Preston's management. The dress shop expanded, eventually taking over the storefront next door and employing 4 women full-time. Beatrice became known throughout Nebraska as one of the finest dressmakers in the territory, with women traveling from as far as Omaha to commission gowns from her. But more important than any of that success was the life they built together. The family dinners around the big kitchen table, with Mrs. Chen's delicious food and the children chattering about their days. The quiet evenings on the porch after the children were asleep, Preston and Beatrice sitting close together, talking about everything and nothing. The family outings on Sundays, picnics by the creek, or rides around the ranch property. The holidays celebrated with friends and employees, the ranch house full of people and light and love. As the children grew, Preston made sure they understood the importance of kindness and compassion. He told them the story of how he and their mother met, about the day he walked into the general store and saw her being mocked for her torn shoes and thin coat. He told them about the old man in Wyoming who had saved his life and taught him the value of passing on kindness. He wanted them to grow up understanding that what you have is less important than what you do with it. That wealth means nothing if you do not use it to help others. Peter grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and wanted to be just like his father. Belle was creative and artistic, showing early talent for drawing and design that Beatrice encouraged. Benjamin was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with a heart of gold that made it impossible to stay angry with him for long. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston gave Beatrice a pendant on a gold chain, a simple design that she recognized immediately. It was a tiny replica of the shoes Martin the cobbler had made for her that first day, perfectly detailed down to the laces. "So you never forget where we started," Preston said as he fastened the chain around her neck. "So you never forget that sometimes the worst days can lead to the best things." Beatrice touched the pendant, tears in her eyes. "How could I ever forget? That day changed my entire life." "You changed my entire life." "We changed each other," Preston corrected, pulling her into his arms. "You made me better, Beatrice. You made me happier. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just running a ranch. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you," Beatrice said, the words she had said 1,000 times, but that never lost their meaning. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Preston replied, "always and forever." As they stood together on the porch of their home, surrounded by the life they had built, Beatrice thought back to that girl in torn shoes and a threadbare coat, scared and alone in a town that saw her as nothing. She thought about the cowboy who had seen her, really seen her, and had chosen kindness when cruelty would have been easier. She thought about how one act of compassion, one moment of human decency, had changed the trajectory of her entire life. She had been mocked and judged and found wanting by people who did not know her, did not care to know her. But Preston had looked past the surface, had seen her potential and her worth, had given her not just new shoes and a new coat, but a new future. He had given her love and partnership and a family. He had given her the opportunity to dream again, to build something meaningful, to become the woman she was always meant to be. And in return, she had given him her whole heart. She had stood beside him through good times and hard times, had supported his dreams as he had supported hers, had built a life with him that was richer than any amount of money could buy. They had created a family together, children who would grow up knowing they were loved, knowing they had value, knowing that kindness and compassion were the most important things a person could possess. The sun was setting over the Nebraska prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The cattle lowed in the distance, a peaceful sound that had become the soundtrack of Beatrice's life. Inside the house, she could hear the children playing, their laughter drifting through the open windows. Mrs. Chen was singing in the kitchen as she prepared dinner, a Chinese song that Beatrice had come to find comforting over the years. This was her life now. This was her home. These were her people. And it had all started with a cowboy who bought her new shoes and a future. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the natural progression of life. The children grew into teenagers and then young adults, each carving their own path in the world. Peter, true to his childhood nature, took over more and more of the ranch operations, learning from his father and eventually becoming a full partner in the business. His dedication and hard work made Preston proud beyond measure, and watching father and son work together side by side was one of Beatrice's greatest joys. Belle pursued her artistic talents, eventually going to school in Chicago to study fashion design. She returned to Valentine with fresh ideas and modern techniques, joining her mother's business and bringing the Walsh dress shop into a new era. Mother and daughter worked together, creating increasingly elaborate and beautiful gowns, their combined talents making the shop famous throughout the region. Benjamin, true to his adventurous spirit, became a horse trader and breeder, traveling throughout the West buying and selling horses. He was good at it, with an eye for quality animals and a natural charm that made people want to do business with him. Though his work kept him on the road much of the time, he always came home to the ranch, bringing stories of his travels and gifts for his family. Preston and Beatrice grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced challenges as all couples do, times when money was tight or when illness threatened, but they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger through adversity. They celebrated triumphs together too, watching their children succeed, seeing their businesses thrive, building a legacy that would last beyond their own lives. Mrs. Chen remained with them until her death at the age of 78, passing peacefully in her sleep after a life well lived. Her loss was deeply felt by the entire family, and they buried her in the family plot on the ranch, honoring her as the beloved member of the family she had been. On the 20th anniversary of that day in the general store, Preston surprised Beatrice by taking her back to town for a special visit. He led her to the spot where they had first met, now a different store under different ownership, but still recognizable. 20 years ago, Preston said, taking her hands in his, I walked through that door and met a woman in torn shoes and a threadbare coat. She looked like she had given up on hope, like life had beaten her down so thoroughly she did not think she could ever get back up. But I saw something in her eyes, a spark of determination, a core of strength that all the hardship in the world could not extinguish. Beatrice smiled, remembering that day so clearly despite the passage of time. I remember thinking you were either crazy or an angel, maybe both, Preston laughed. I was neither. I was just a man who recognized a kindred spirit, someone who had been knocked down but was still fighting to stand back up. I wanted to help you, but more than that, I wanted to know you. From that very first moment, something in me recognized something in you. Love at first sight. Beatrice teased gently. Maybe, Preston admitted. Or maybe just the recognition that you were someone special, someone who was going to change my life. Either way, buying you those shoes and that coat was the best investment I ever made. It was not an investment, Beatrice protested. It was a gift, freely given. And it paid dividends beyond anything I could have imagined, Preston said. 20 years of love, 3 beautiful children, a partnership that has made me happier than I ever thought possible. If that is not a return on investment, I do not know what is. They walked through Valentine together, hand in hand, visiting all the places that had been important in their relationship. The cobbler's shop where Martin had fitted her with her first pair of good shoes. The spot where the dress shop had been before Belle expanded it into a larger location. The church where they had married. The general store where Preston had defended her against cruel women who could not see past the surface. The town had changed over the years, growing and evolving as more people settled in the area. But some things remained the same. People still gathered for the annual harvest dance. The church still held services every Sunday, and the spirit of community, for better and worse, still shaped the daily lives of Valentine's residents. Some of the people who had been cruel to Beatrice in those early days had mellowed over time, their judgment softening as they saw her success and her happiness. A few had even apologized, acknowledging their earlier rudeness. Mrs. Cartwright, however, remained as judgmental as ever, though age had diminished her influence, and most people now ignored her complaints. As they walked, they ran into Emily Reynolds, now Emily Harrison, with 4 children of her own and another on the way. She greeted them warmly, as she always did, and they chatted for a while about family and business and life in general. Emily had remained one of Beatrice's closest friends over the years, and the bond between them had only strengthened with time. "You two still look at each other like newlyweds," Emily observed with a smile. 20 years later and Preston still watches you like you hung the moon." "That is because she did," Preston said simply, squeezing Beatrice's hand. They ended their anniversary day back at the ranch, on the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. The sun was setting, as it had been on that day 10 years ago when Preston had given Beatrice the pendant. She wore it still, the tiny shoes resting against her heart, a constant reminder of where they had begun. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not walked into that store that day?" Preston asked as they sat together watching the sunset. Beatrice considered the question seriously. "I try not to," she admitted. "I think I would have survived. I am tougher than I look and I have always been a fighter, but I do not think I would have thrived. I do not think I would have been happy. I certainly would not have had all this." She gestured at the ranch, at the life they had built. "You gave me more than shoes and a coat, Preston. You gave me hope. You gave me the courage to dream again. You gave me love and family and a future I could never have imagined for myself." "And you gave me purpose," Preston replied. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions of life, building the ranch, making money, but not really living. You taught me what it means to truly share your life with someone, to be part of something bigger than yourself. You made me understand that success is not about what you accumulate, but about what you give and who you love." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Beatrice leaned against Preston's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. 20 years together, and she loved him more now than she had on their wedding day. 20 years of building a life, raising children, facing challenges and celebrating victories. 20 years of partnership and friendship and deep, abiding love. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Preston asked, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "For seeing me that day," Beatrice said. "For seeing past the torn shoes and the threadbare coat to the person underneath. For believing I was worth helping, worth knowing, worth loving. Thank you for giving me a future when I thought I had none." Preston tilted her chin up and kissed her, sweet and tender despite all the years between them. "Thank you for accepting my help," he said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with more kindness than sense. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." They sat together as the night deepened around them, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something lasting and true from a moment of compassion. The ranch was quiet now, the children grown and busy with their own lives, but the love that filled this place remained as strong as ever. Inside the house, the lamplight glowed warm through the windows. In the barn, the horses shifted and settled for the night. In the fields, the cattle lay down in the grass. Everything was peaceful, everything was right, everything was exactly as it should be. And on the porch, a woman who had once been mocked for her poverty sat in the arms of the man who had seen her worth. Grateful beyond measure for the day a cowboy bought her new shoes and a future, and in doing so, gave them both a love that would last a lifetime. The years that followed were gentler, marked by the contentment that comes from a life well lived. Preston and Beatrice grew old together gracefully, their hair graying, their steps slowing, but their love remaining as vibrant as ever. They became grandparents as their children married and had families of their own, and the ranch house once again filled with the sounds of young voices and small feet running through the halls. Peter married a school teacher named Anna, and they gave Preston and Beatrice 4 grandchildren. Belle married a banker from Omaha named Robert, and they had 3 children. Benjamin eventually settled down with a rancher's daughter named Catherine, and they had 5 children who inherited their father's love of horses and their mother's practical nature. The family gatherings at the ranch became legendary, with 3 generations coming together for holidays and special occasions. The long table in the dining room, the one Preston had built when they first married, could barely hold everyone, and they often had to set up additional tables to accommodate the crowd. But cramped as it sometimes was, those gatherings were filled with love and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love who love you in return. Preston taught his grandsons about ranching, passing on the knowledge his father had given him and the lessons he had learned through years of hard work. He taught them about the importance of treating animals with respect, of managing resources wisely, of being fair with employees and neighbors. But more than anything, he taught them about kindness, about seeing people's worth regardless of their circumstances, about using whatever you have to help others. Beatrice taught her granddaughters to sew, showing them the techniques that had sustained her through hard times and eventually built her successful business. But she also taught them about resilience, about believing in themselves even when others did not, about the importance of having dreams and working toward them. She told them about the girl she had been, poor and frightened and alone, and how one person's kindness had changed everything. She wanted them to understand that compassion was powerful, that how you treat others matters, that everyone has a story worth knowing. On Preston's 60th birthday, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There was food and music and dancing, much like that first dance where Preston had taken Beatrice so many years ago. As the evening wore on and the younger grandchildren were carried off to bed, Preston pulled Beatrice onto the makeshift dance floor in the barn and held her close as they swayed to a slow song. "You remember our first dance?" he asked softly. "How could I forget?" Beatrice replied, her hand resting over his heart. "I was so nervous, so sure that everyone was judging us." "They probably were," Preston said with a small smile, "but we proved them wrong, did we not? We built something real and lasting, something that goes beyond what any of those judgmental people could have imagined." "We did," Beatrice agreed. She looked around the barn at their children and their spouses, at the grandchildren who were still awake and running around with the boundless energy of youth. "We built all of this, Preston. A family, a legacy, a life filled with love. We took that moment of kindness in the general store and turned it into something beautiful." "You turned it into something beautiful," Preston corrected. "I just gave you shoes and a coat. You took those small gifts and built an empire of compassion and success. You raised amazing children, you created a thriving business, you touched countless lives with your kindness and your talent. I am so proud of you, Beatrice. So proud of the woman you are and everything you have accomplished." Beatrice felt tears prickling at her eyes, the happy tears that seemed to come more easily as she got older. "I could not have done any of it without you. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. Every good thing I have, every happy moment, every accomplishment, they are all sweeter because I get to share them with you." They danced until the music stopped, holding each other close, savoring the warmth and comfort of a love that had been tested by time and had only grown stronger. When the last notes faded away, Preston kissed his wife, tender and sweet, and whispered against her lips, "I would do it all again. Every moment, every choice, every challenge, as long as it led me to you." 2 years later, on a cold February morning, Preston suffered a stroke while working in the barn. Peter found him and got him to the house, where Doc Harrison, now quite elderly himself but still practicing, did what he could. Preston survived, but the stroke left him weakened, unable to work the ranch as he once had. He struggled with this loss of independence, with having to rely on others for things he had always done himself. But Beatrice was there beside him every step of the way, helping him through his recovery with the same dedication and love she had shown throughout their marriage. It took months, but Preston regained much of his strength and mobility, though he never quite returned to his former vigor. He handed over the running of the ranch entirely to Peter, content to serve as an advisor and to spend his days doing lighter work and spending time with Beatrice. In some ways, the stroke was a blessing in disguise, forcing Preston to slow down and appreciate the quieter moments of life. They spent those final years together in gentle contentment. They took walks around the ranch property, Preston leaning on Beatrice's arm, pointing out changes and improvements Peter had made. They sat on the porch for hours, talking about the past and enjoying the present. They played with their grandchildren, read books together, and simply enjoyed the peace that comes from a life well lived and a love well tended. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a grand celebration. People came from all over Nebraska to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the region. The story of how they met, of the cowboy who bought torn shoes and a threadbare coat for a stranger and found love in the process, had been told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But as Preston stood to speak to the gathered crowd, leaning heavily on his cane but with his mind still sharp and his voice still strong, he brought the story back to its essential truth. 40 years ago, he said, I made the best decision of my life. I chose kindness over indifference. I chose to see a person's worth instead of judging their circumstances. I chose to help someone who needed help, and in doing so, I found the greatest treasure of my life. He looked at Beatrice, his eyes shining with undimmed love. My wife taught me that strength comes in many forms. That courage is not about never being afraid, but about facing your fears anyway. That love is not something that happens to you, but something you build together, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. He reached out his hand to Beatrice, and she took it, standing beside him as she had stood beside him for 4 decades. We have had a good life together, Preston continued. We have built something lasting, something that will continue long after we are gone. Our children carry on our values. Our grandchildren will pass those values to their own children. The kindness that started all those years ago in a general store continues to ripple outward, touching more lives than we will ever know. So let me say this to all of you gathered here today. Do not underestimate the power of a single act of compassion. Do not think that your kindness is too small to matter, because sometimes when you reach out to help someone, you are not just changing their life. You are changing your own life too. You are creating something beautiful that will last far beyond anything you can imagine. The crowd erupted in applause, and Preston sat down, exhausted but happy. Beatrice squeezed his hand, her own eyes wet with tears. They had built a good life, she and Preston. They had taken a moment of kindness and turned it into 40 years of love. They had created a family, built successful businesses, and touched countless lives with their compassion and generosity. And through it all, they had loved each other deeply and truly. Preston lived another 3 years after that anniversary, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71 with Beatrice holding his hand. His death was deeply mourned by family and community alike, with hundreds attending his funeral to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his fairness, and his kindness. Beatrice grieved deeply, as anyone would after losing their partner of 43 years. But she found comfort in the legacy they had built together, in the children and grandchildren who carried on their values, in the memories of a love that had sustained her through both hardship and joy. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by family, still occasionally working on special sewing projects when her hands and eyes allowed. She would sit on the porch in the evenings, in the same spot where she and Preston had spent so many hours together, and she would touch the pendant around her neck, the tiny shoes that reminded her of where it all began. She would think about the girl she had been, frightened and alone in her torn shoes and threadbare coat. She would think about the man who had seen her worth, who had chosen kindness, who had given her not just material help but hope and love and a future. And she would smile, grateful beyond measure for every moment they had shared, every memory they had made, every life they had touched together. The cowboy who had bought her new shoes had given her so much more than he could have ever known. He had given her a life of purpose and meaning, a love that transcended circumstances, a family that would carry on their legacy for generations to come. When Beatrice passed away at the age of 84, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her last thoughts were of Preston. She imagined him waiting for her, young and strong again, holding out his hand to her as he had that first day in the general store. And as she took her final breath, she whispered his name, ready to be reunited with the love of her life, ready to begin their next adventure together. They buried her beside Preston in the family plot on the ranch, under a tree they had planted together on their 10th wedding anniversary. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and the dates of their lives, along with an inscription that told their story in just a few words. From torn shoes to forever love, together they built a legacy of kindness. The ranch continued on under Peter's management, and eventually under his son's management after him. The dress shop remained a Valentine institution, run by Belle's daughter and then her granddaughter. The values that Preston and Beatrice had instilled in their children spread through the family tree, passed down from generation to generation, creating ripples of kindness and compassion that touched countless lives. And sometimes, when the family gathered at the ranch for reunions and celebrations, the oldest members would tell the story to the youngest ones. They would talk about the day a cowboy walked into a general store and saw a girl being mocked for her torn shoes and threadbare coat. They would talk about how he bought her new ones, and in doing so, bought them both a future. They would talk about the love that grew from that single act of kindness, about the family that was built on a foundation of compassion and respect, about the legacy that continued on long after its founders had passed. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing on. Because it was more than just a love story, though it was certainly that. It was a reminder that kindness matters, that how we treat others shapes not just their lives but our own, that the smallest gestures can have the biggest impacts. It was a reminder that everyone has worth, regardless of their circumstances, and that seeing and honoring that worth is one of the most important things we can do. The story of Preston Parker and Beatrice Walsh became a family legend, but it was rooted in truth. It was the story of two people who found each other against all odds, who built something beautiful from a moment of compassion, who loved each other deeply for more than 4 decades. It was the story of torn shoes and threadbare coats, of new beginnings and second chances, of dreams realized and legacies built. Most of all, it was the story of how one person's kindness can change everything. How one moment of seeing another person's worth can create ripples that spread far beyond anything we can imagine. It was the story of a cowboy who bought a stranger new shoes and a coat, and in doing so, bought them both a future filled with love and happiness and purpose. And that story, like all the best stories, would continue to be told for generations to come, inspiring others to choose kindness, to see worth in everyone, to believe that compassion can change the world one person at a time. Because Preston and Beatrice had proven it was true. They had lived it, built it, and passed it on to everyone whose lives they touched. Their love story was complete, their legacy assured, their impact immeasurable. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, two souls who had found each other in a moment of kindness were together again, their love transcending even death, eternal and unbreakable and true.